Good afternoon. Hopefully this thing's working. I'm Bill LaCourse, Dean of the College of Natural Mathematical Sciences, and I'm delighted to welcome you both here and online, to welcome our special guests from the University of Innovation Alliance. We have Dr. Bridget Burns, Executive Director, who will be meeting in a moment, Danielle Santos, Program Manager of the Alliance Engagement, and Camilo Villalpando, Program Manager of UIA Fellows Program. Now, before I begin with the formal introduction, the words that were written for me, I'm going to make sure I say those. I already know that I'm not going to do justice to this introduction. Because if you've ever been to a meeting that's led by Dr. Burns, you'll know that she starts off with a soundtrack or a music or a mix or what does that come from, Spotify or something like that? Right? And it just gets everybody, their blood going, their energy. You see people with the little black squares on the screen come up. They start dancing. Yvette goes crazy. So she can't even stop herself from singing along. So I don't have that. So I'm sorry. You're just going to have to do it the UMBC way a little bit here. So earlier this year, we received the terrific news that UMBC was invited to join a select group of UIA institutions committed to working together to dramatically boost college success for students from low-income backgrounds and students in color. The first time I went to UIA was back in 2016, and little did I know that was a part of the interview process. No, just kidding, as we go along. But I'm glad we did. We must have had, UMBC represents itself well, and I'm glad that we're part of it. And of course, we said yes to the invitation. UMBC and UIA are both driven by shared values as well as steady attention to data and outcomes. And I believe me, focus is on the data and evidence-based practices. During President Barack Obama's College Opportunity Summit in 2014, the UIA's 11 founding institutions set a target of graduating 68,000 additional students over 10 years, including half from low-income backgrounds. And in just 6 years, they have already exceeded that goal. Together, they have graduated more than 73,000 additional students, increasing graduates from low-income backgrounds by 36% and graduates of color by 73%. Through testing, scaling, and sharing innovative and successful practices. UMBC has increased its 6-year graduation rate for full-time freshmen from 55.7 for the fall of 2005 cohort to 70.2% for the fall 2015 cohort. And through that's good stuff. And through a steady stream of innovation, including course redesign, student success initiatives, and academic advocacy, much of it led by the individuals sitting in this audience and listening out there as well. And both UIA and UMBC know that their success is never final. Where have we heard that before? So the stakes have never been greater for higher education to produce diverse graduates prepared to address the great challenges of our time, from sustaining democracy and advancing equity to pandemic recovery and prevention to dramatically reducing our carbon footprint. We are delighted to have UIA Executive Director, Dr. Bridget Burns, with us today to officially launch our partnership. Named one of the 16th most innovative people in higher education by Washington Monthly Magazine, Dr. Burns is the founding Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance, which has been highlighted in national outlets like the New York Times, Fast Company, in 60 Minutes. She is a trusted advisor to university presidents, system leaders, and policymakers. Dr. Burns is on a mission to transform the way institutions think about and take action on behalf of low-income, first-generation, and students of color. She received her doctorate of education from Vanderbilt University in higher education, leadership, and policy. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Bridget Burns. Come on out. I know you did.
You have no idea how long I have waited to come to UMBC and to say welcome to the University Innovation Alliance. I am so excited. You have to know that from the very beginning, UMBC, while you were not currently a member of the Alliance, you were always on our radar. We were always, like, Freeman was always like giving me the, like, what's the deal? When's this gonna happen? And I always knew that it was an inevitability because the demonstrated history and commitment to student success, the passion that I would hear whenever I talked to anyone from UMBC, I always knew that you were our people and that you shared our values. And so I am just so delighted to finally be here and to finally be at this day where you're a member of the Alliance. So like it's, you know, it only took like 7 years, which like in higher ed world, that is lightning fast. You heard a little bit, thank you so much for the introduction, but I think that there's probably other elements of my background that will probably be a little bit more helpful to give you context for today. I'm going to talk to you about the Alliance. I'm going to share with you how we work so that you can be an informed participant, and also just share with you some of the hopeful things we found along the way that we hope inspire you and support you in this work. So as I said, you heard a little bit about my background, but that's not probably the most important. Probably the most important part about my background is that I grew up in poverty in rural Montana, and I was one of those students who we're all familiar with, like a low-income first generation or student of color. Like, I didn't have anyone talk to me about going to college in a helpful way. I grew up in a family of 4 living on less than $20,000 a year. My father was paralyzed when I was 2 years old, and my mom stayed home and took care of him, and so essentially we lived off of his Social Security. And the only time that anyone talked about college was when my dad would make jokes that if I wanted to go, I should do what my brother did, and I should try and win a state championship in wrestling. And that was very helpful advice. I wrestled for 1.2 seconds. It was not a good strategy for me. But like a lot of, especially first generation students, I sifted through that bad advice and I found something that I found some nuggets that I could follow. You know, we're always, like, first gen students in particular get a lot of really bad advice. And so what I sifted through and I found was that if I was really good at something, that I would get to go to college and that it would work out. And so I focused really hard on winning a state championship, completely neglected my studies, and by the time I barely graduated high school, I had a 2.3 GPA and just the skin of my teeth. But I was a state champion in debate. And it turns out that people aren't as interested in mediocre students that can argue about it as they are Big Ten wrestlers. So that was a harsh reality to face. I was one of those kids who just barely made it to the right side of the tracks and just ran like heck. And so at 18, I took off to the only place that would take me, which was a community college. And I, just like many of our other students, I had the perspective that I think we have to actually reflect on, which is I believed, being raised to respect my elders, knowing that I had filled out this really complicated form to tell about my financial background, that I was going to trust the adults, that they were obviously, they knew what my background was, and they told me that going to college was worth it, that I should just follow the path. They handed me a choose your own adventure map, and I thought, well, of course, if I get off track, they'll just tell me. Someone's going to be paying attention. And I know that you all know the end of the story, which is nobody was watching. And I took super interesting classes that had nothing to do with my program of study. And by the time I did graduate, it was 7 years later. 7 with my bachelor's degree. And I had 50 extra credits that didn't apply to my degree. And I had $50,000 in student loans. And so this is the best case scenario for a lot of students, right? Most students wouldn't have actually completed. What I'd stumbled upon in my experience is something that is at the core of the work that we do in the Alliance. It's a fundamental recognition of a design flaw that we need to all acknowledge, and it underpins everything we do, which is that higher education was never designed around students. It just wasn't. It was originally, if you look back at the original design of higher education in the United States, it was designed around the faculty, because that was the intellectual capital. And if we didn't have the faculty, we would have nothing. The problem is, over time, we added some administration, and bureaucracy was also part of that design. but never students. And the result is that we end up with a lot of booby traps and landmines that were not set on purpose. They are accidental, but they do not serve students. And by the way, do you know who's the most upset about that design problem? Faculty. Because they have a front row seat to watch students walk out their door every day, never to return again, for a totally predictable reason that they have already raised their hand about. Because it's just how it's been. And so we recognize that design is a huge problem. And by the way, sometimes people give me a hard time about this and they don't believe it's true. The best example that applies everywhere is graduation. Every university I go to, it doesn't matter who they are, they have the same problems with graduation. Graduation is supposed to be something that we're into, right? Kind of our jam, kind of the goal. And yet, every institution has the same process that is not designed around students, which is when a student is ready to graduate, they have to tell us because we don't know. Our systems are not set up for the right people to know and to reach out and to guide. A lot of this has to be self-paced by the student, and they have to choose your own adventure maps. And then when they do signal, by applying, they then have to fill out a bunch of forms and paperwork, right? They have to apply. And then they usually have to pay a fee. Now, if you're trying to incentivize a certain behavior, if you think that thing is your outcome, then why would you put so many hurdles in front of it? And why would you make it something that the student has to be the one to know? And this is true everywhere. It's not user-centered design. Now, in this age, everyone really values, people are willing to give up some of their data and their privacy because they want good design. We want customer service. We want people to actually do things that make our lives easier. Students want us to make their lives easier. They want the process of going to college to be a better one for them. So this is a fundamental piece of our work. And once you accept this, you can see it everywhere. Financial aid holds, advising, who owns what data, what things we talk about. So this is a piece of what matters if you think about the history of higher ed, but there's another piece, and that is that all higher education institutions are basically doing somewhat the same thing. Now, modality, location, size, quality, all those things, they can change. But ultimately, most institutions are replicating the same design. And that design, it came because of something called isomorphism, which for all of my public administration folks and org theory folks, you're like, that's what's up. Who knew that I was going to throw back some isomorphism early in the day? And that is essentially that higher education universities basically copy each other. We all have the same offices. We have the same organizational structure and design because just like hospitals, right? We are in different places, but we're basically doing similar stuff. We have bursars offices, we have financial aid offices, we have the same structures. And so while this might for some people be not great, what I think is great about it is it means that we have the same problems. And it means that when we try a solution that works in one place, it needs to be adapted. Cut and paste is not a reality, but it will actually work in other places because we actually have fairly similar challenges. And so isomorphism is one of the fundamental underpinnings that actually I think brings good news. When we first designed universities in this country, we replicated fancy models, right? We're all the Harvard of something. But the problem is that when we did this, we also borrowed a value system. And the value system of higher education very much needs to change. And that is a belief of the Alliance, and everything we do is about changing and galvanizing momentum towards a new model, which is, this old value system is that it serve the few and not the many. It was never designed to serve as many people as we need to serve right now. And you cannot look at what's happening in this country and not think that we need to serve more. It was also designed under this idea that small equals good and big equals bad. It was also designed around this premise that if a student drops out, it's their fault. And especially if a low-income or first-generation college student drops out, it's because, well, I don't know, it's something special about them. So what we're going to do is we're going to bolt on a solution. We're going to create a center. We're going to do a little thing for them. When really, we would say that low-income, first-generation, and students of color are our design North Star. They are who we should design our institutions around, because those students are struggling with the same challenges that will affect others. They are students, they just have the additional challenges that come with being a low-income, first-generation, or student of color. And we think that that centering of our work is essential to everything that we do. Because the things that trip them up, bad communication, over-communication, under-communication, data not communicated across sectors, ownership issues, that yes, there's financial barriers, but a lot of this stuff is about user-centered design. So those are two big kind of primers on where we begin our work in the Alliance. And it's really important, I think, because not only is this not serving us as a model just intuitively, but it's also really showing up in the data. And so this is what, when we first started with, there were a few data points that really struck us. The first is that we have to produce more college degrees, high quality college degrees from research universities, we would suggest, and serving people across the broad spectrum of society. We know that by 2025, at the time this, that the Georgetown Center for Education and the Workforce produced this, we were about 14, or it was between 11 and 14 million college graduates shy of what we needed to produce to keep up with the economic competitiveness of our country. And I know that this is a controversial topic because everybody loves to talk trash about college, but I would just say this is rooted in the fact that we fail half of all the people who walk in the door. And we have to adapt some of what we do to the actual current needs of the labor market. I get it. In COVID, we're definitely hearing micro-credentials, the evolution of what we offer. That's fine. But I would just say in general, there are a lot of people who have not been served, and there are more people who are walking around that went to college and didn't get a degree than did. And that is a threat to the competitiveness of our country. So, more degrees. The second data point that really mattered is that for the first time in US history, low-income students are the majority in public K-12, which means that the students, we need to step up and serve more students, and they are likely going to be coming from a low-income background. So if our institutions weren't designed around students, and we know that there are lots of impediments that can get in the way, especially for low-income students, then we need to make sure that we are also centering them in our design aspirations, that we are doing the work to support them. The last piece is, well, this is the evidence in that we do a bad job with those students. So students from my background are this red line on the bottom. Back in the 70s, we graduated, I had a 6 out of 100 chance of getting a bachelor's degree being born in the United States. And after all of our time, even updated, we've had the data updated, it's only about 10%, so 10 out of 100. So in that much time, that's how much progress we've made in terms of your likelihood, if you're born into a family below the poverty line, that you will get a bachelor's degree. But we are killing it at the highest income quartile, right? I mean, we are definitely, we've doubled our ability to produce a college degree if you're born into a high income family. So we know progress is possible. We've also doubled our achievement gap, right? So this just, again, is underpinning the design of everything that we do in the Alliance. We need to actually step up, and we need to work together to be able to produce more degrees at scale, specifically for low-income, first-generation, and students of color. So we know that this is not accidental, and that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does. So if higher education continues on unchanged, unevolved, we will continue to have these kinds of results. And we've all seen in this last year what the consequences are if we don't invest in the intellectual capital of our country and we don't give everyone a chance to participate. And so this is something that has led to the creation of the Alliance. So the Alliance itself, there you are. I'm not saying, I won't pick a favorite. You can ask me to, and when it's just me and you, I will say you're my favorite. The thing that, the Alliance was formed when a group of presidents happened to be in a room having a conversation about those data points. And those presidents were like, man, we got to work together on this. Like, what are you doing? Oh, that's interesting. I think I'm doing something like that, but I'm not sure. Well, what about you? Are you doing something similar? It literally starts with the idea of, wow, we actually are struggling with the same problem. And somehow the presidents were able to say, let's just team up. Let's see if we can scale those ideas. And so originally, it was just going to stay those 11 because we were an experiment. We didn't know if this would work. And so until we had completed our biggest goals, we weren't actually open to try and consider other new members. So that the thing that also matters is that these institutions, there's only one per state. And I don't think people always know that, but that will always be the case. We think that it's hard to collaborate in your own state. There's competition about resources and all kinds of things. So you are Maryland as well. I mean, you can definitely, yeah, so you can definitely brag about that. I mean, don't start any fights, but I'm just saying. The other part is these are the original founding goals. These are the goals of the Alliance. So more degrees, specifically for low-income students. We want to innovate together. We're going to hold down our costs. We're going to share our data transparently. And we're also, this is the newest goal that was added almost 3 years ago, we're going to move towards eliminating disparities in degree outcomes based on student characteristics, including race and ethnicity. And we believe we can do that by engaging in identity-conscious redesign, which has not happened for predominantly white institutions. And even MSIs, we actually have to work together to figure out the process of doing this work together so that the rest of the country can also do it, because it has to happen. The data in terms of who we are comparatively, while we might not dominate the headlines and get all the attention of these quote-unquote elite institutions, it's really important to contextualize that when we're talking about the future of our country, the future of our democracy, because the purpose of higher education is the preservation of democracy, that it's really public universities that are doing the yeoman's work, and that we have to acknowledge that this is where we're going to see the most progress. And so this is something that, I mean, this slide is pretty good, right? It's a good slide. So this is whenever people are trying to talk about the Ivy League, I'm like, oh sweetie. So how we do our work, though, this is part of the big part of today, is we do basically 3 buckets. So innovation is work that it's never been done before. We need to figure this out. We don't know how to do this. It's a problem everybody has. And it's specifically to serve these students. Let's team up. Let's see if we can figure this out. And let's do it publicly. And let's share what we learn, even if we fail. Because we're committed to talking about failure and sharing what we learned from it, because we think that's actually what's been holding higher education back. Scale has been the bulk in the past of our work, which is we take an idea from one place that works, and we try and scale it or implement it in a place far away. And we're interested in how did you adapt it? How did you evolve it? What did you learn? What didn't work? What didn't translate? And that is a part of a method for scale that has also been missing from higher ed. We have been doing far too much tinkering in silos when we've actually needed a meaningful way that you can take an idea and implement it, and not just like have to put your shoulder into it and like hope that like the right people up at the top of the org chart will sponsor it. There actually needs to be a meaningful way. And diffusion, we want to give it all away. We think that we can ignite and inspire the rest of higher education to change. We produce playbooks, we live stream, we're noisy, and we talk about these things and we share about our values, because we think it's really important to have a public demonstration that you can believe in different things than just what US News once told you mattered. And by doing it together and loudly, consistently over time, we think that we can actually change the future of higher education, period. And we're right. This is our results thus far. We first set a goal of graduating at least 68,000 additional graduates by 2025. That was our original first goal. This last year, we announced we've already hit 73,000. That's the point in which we could finally open up and invite someone new. And don't worry, we've been staring at you for a couple years. We knew who we were going to be inviting in. But yes, so we executed on that goal. I think the other numbers are really exciting. We've increased our graduates of color annually by 73%, and annually increased our low-income graduates by 37%. So we know that you can actually change, and you can move, and you can do it together, and you can do it faster together. So therefore, I'm going to share with you the stuff that actually helped. But I think that for a lot of people, when they don't understand what this work is, they're always kind of like, well, how is it different? Like, what's the theory of change? I often describe, it's like I run a Weight Watchers meeting for higher education institutions to be good at something that they've never been good at. Because we actually borrowed a lot of design principles from Weight Watchers, in that, at Weight Watchers, you have to decide this matters to you and you have to sign yourself up. No one can sign you up for it. And same with the Alliance. I don't care what your board of governors says or someone else. If the president actually has to, like, this is what matters to us and we want to do this. I'm not interested in convincing anyone that this is the right work. You also, at Weight Watchers meetings, you show up and you get weighed in on the same scale. Every year we have a data sharing agreement where we weigh ourselves together. And we don't ever produce any comparative data publicly because there's plenty of that out there that's not useful. And we think shame is not really an effective vehicle to drive change. And so, but we look at how we're doing internally. And also, when you go in the back room at Weight Watchers, you can talk to people about the things that are hard and that you're struggling with, and you're all on the same journey, and it's not a competition. And so you can talk about things that have typically been taboo, like failure, which is the thing that higher ed needs to talk about, because every institution has at least $1 million failure that we don't talk about, and we hide it under the rug, and we are sentencing other institutions to replicate that failure. And students are the ones who are paying the price. So that is how, you know how like when you meet someone in an elevator and they ask what you do for a living, and like that's the best I can do, because otherwise I think people just still think I'm in college. And that's fine. That's what my parents probably would tell you. So that is the basic of the Alliance. And I want to get into like how we actually work, but you've been sitting for 20 minutes, and I can see it's lunch, which, by the way, thanks for giving up food. That's so cool that you're just going to live off water. If you're physically able, could you stand? And those of you at home, feel free to do this as well, because I know that Zoom fatigue is set in. So, and if I could get my jam back on. Great, yeah. So feel free to move a little bit. This is good for you, I promise. There's actually a lesson. Yes, it's good. It's good stuff. There's really nothing that September can't solve. So there's some actual like reasoning behind this, which is, you can go ahead, thank you. So you have all been sitting for more than 20 minutes. So there's a protein that your brain produces called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. It helps you retain new information. After you've been sitting for 20 minutes, you produce less of it. This is science that comes from higher education. And yet, how long are our lectures? See, I'm telling you, we have all the smart people in higher education. If we just actually tap them, we think we can actually figure this out, because we know a lot about how to help a person bring in new ideas, retain them, and use them. So feel free to sit whatever you want. I just wanted to invite you to recover. So, and also because I need to brace you for the next picture, which is what you look like. These are the things that get in the way, and if we don't talk about them, I'll go quickly. I'm trying not to bum you out, that we won't be able to solve problems. The first is 2021, you. Yeah. Exhaustion and burnout and fatigue and overwhelm and the mental health challenges that we all have, that is the biggest threat to student success innovation at the moment. But this is typically what I would talk about, is capacity. We don't have an intentional strategy when we bring in a new idea. We believe that if you are good at doing your work, the reward is more work. Yeah, you see that happen on the org chart. When we bring in a new idea, we believe that your plate will expand. We just believe that you'll figure it out. Isn't it great, the confidence that we have in you as a sector? We also don't give you any of the resources or time that you need. If you open your phone, your calendar, that is one of the greatest impediments to innovation as well. Because you never give yourself time to think about new ideas. You don't get time to actually learn from failure. You don't get time to think about how you need to restructure your day so that you could actually thrive. So it's a capacity problem. We're not very smart about this thing. And I'm telling you, we have the smart people to help us figure this out, but this is a big obstacle. And if we don't fix it, I don't care what kind of like AI chatbot, helicopter, velociraptor, whatever you want to bring in here that seems really important, like it's going to fix it. Nothing will fix anything if we don't actually start designing everything we do around the people who are going to do the work. And so that's a fundamental premise of the Alliance. If what we do creates more work for you, then we're not doing it well. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to do great work and it's not going to be hard and meaningful, but we're very intentional about how we give it to you. So I'm not going to ask the data teams for a data dump during the busiest week of the year. They tell us when it's a good time for them to actually produce that data because they get plenty of requests. We don't have our presidents fly across the country to go to board meetings because we just want to. We design it, when are you already going to be? We usually do it around APLU, but like, where are you already going to be? And that's where we'll have our board meeting. I'm not saying it's super radical. It's just the very basic premise, and that what we do is based on you, or else it won't work. There's also that, well, because he'll keep going, I'll hold off for a second. Every campus I come to, people are always trying to show me all the great things they're doing. And it's awesome. It's a real honor. But I have to tell you that it's just like when you go to the gym, and it frequently looks like this, where you're just like, I don't understand why you're doing that first instead of this, and I don't know how you're thinking that's going to solve it. How are you going to know you're successful? How are you measuring it? Where did you come up with this idea, and why is this the most high-order thing for you to focus on? The lack of intentionality, the lack of a plan, which is, again, rooted in a lack of time, that is a huge problem. And this is how you feel every time that you work really hard on a project and it doesn't end up getting implemented. Or you work on something and it fails because, gosh darn it, how have we not learned the lesson of not talking to talk to a student before we spend a ton of time designing something for them? We fail to learn lessons from our past work, and it's demoralizing. And it's heartbreaking for a lot of people because they give their careers to this work. I believe that people work in higher ed because it changed your life just like it changed mine. And that's the only reason. And you want to pay it forward. And so when we consistently fail to set ourselves up to learn from the past mistakes, it's like we have to do better. Lastly, when you do actually feel like you have a sense of, okay, I think I want to do this, or someone over there, they look like they have all the answers, if you ask them what they did or how they learned and what do they wish they'd done, that maybe they didn't, this is what it's like to talk to them. We have a sector that values the wrong things. You get headlines for talking about how great you are. In the Alliance, we don't care if you've done something. We only care if you've helped someone else replicate it. If you talk to me about what you taught them, you show me how you've actually helped someone else and how it adapted. That's what matters. You don't get attention or get on stage for doing something once. You do if you'll share something that was hard that you overcome. If you share about something that was a surprise that caught you off guard. We value and create a very intentional culture around trust so that vulnerability can be allowed and celebrated, because we know it is actually the secret sauce for collaboration, for innovation and change. So those are the things that get in the way. But don't worry, there's lots of things that help. And the first piece of how we work that was designed to address these challenges was first rooted in focusing on capacity. And it's going to be your fellow. I can't wait for you to find your fellow. So for those of you who are not familiar, we created this program because I kept going place to place and seeing that it was this overwhelm thing, that I would just go to meetings with folks and we'd talk about student success, and then I'd be like, well, who's gonna follow up on this? I don't know, but we'll have another meeting, right? There's no time, there's no staff to support work in between meetings. And what we would also see is that there's usually a couple folks who are kind of like given all the work of student success as a reward for doing good work. And their plates just get bigger and bigger, and you can barely see them out from underneath that pile of papers. And those people are overwhelmed. And what we figured out is, borrowing a model that we saw at Arizona State, is that what if we give them a chief of staff to actually offload their work, the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that can actually be exported. And the fellow is really kind of a collaborator, and someone who's early to mid-career. They are a smart thinker, doer. They sometimes, a lot of them have PhDs, some don't. They don't want to be faculty. They actually just want to work on change and innovation. And that's a skill set that the Academy does not actually have in-house. They are expert facilitators, they can project manage, they can do all kinds of things. They're like a Swiss Army knife, right? Inside, the call is coming from inside the house. That is really important because we don't think you need to spend a bunch of money on consultants. This person's going to live here. They're going to work for you. You're going to pick them. It's a short term, like 1 to 3 years. You fall in love with your fellow. Ideally, we believe they have to be former first generation, low income, and students of color who care personally about this work. And we believe we are creating a new pipeline of future college presidents that actually look like the students that we serve. And the fellows are the secret sauce. Everyone tries to replicate what the Alliance is doing, but if you don't have a fellow, it just doesn't work. Someone has to get up and think about this work every day. And their job is to actually just make your lives better and to make sure that things are happening in between meetings and conversations. And they're amazing. They're the greatest, and they're now going on to staff major national initiatives. So the fellow, this idea that you actually embed the solution inside the institution. So there are a lot of folks who have this idea about innovation, that it's like a vice president for innovation who's going to shove innovation down into the university. Or maybe it's going to be a center that's over here, and that's where you go, because that's where the innovation sits. It's actually super insulting for the people who've given their lives to higher education. We believe that you all are actually, the people who work in higher ed are innovative. Capacity and overwhelm and burnout are actually what's getting in the way. And so you embed support and the way that you design your work so that they can actually have their load lightened and they can actually work on this work. It's not that radical, it's just basically that's going to be what the premise is. So when you meet your fellow, you'll understand that's the potential of what they're going to do. We also have teams, student success teams that evolve over time. It's not a set thing, it's not a committee. Committees are about communication, teams are about action. The difference is a team first, they actually have a fellow who staffs it, so work happens. Otherwise, it would just be someone's borrowed assistant for like 1 hour a week, maybe. And the teams evolve. They're really based on what is the project that we're working on together. And they have data that they are measuring themselves by. They are checking in regularly. And then the teams come to UIA convenings where we actually build professional development. Right now, there's a data equity training that we're doing virtually. But someday soon, back in the future, the Alliance will have in-person convenings again, and they are amazing. And yes, there is always a playlist. We believe that this work is the greatest work you can do, and we believe that you need to embed it with joy and playfulness. And we believe that collaboration can be joyful, but only if you design it well. And we also want to make sure that this work is uplifting and inspiring and fun. And I know this sounds like I just described like the McDonald's playroom, but it is actually very effective over time because we don't think that you need another bummer meeting to go to. And so we do the professional development, but these teams evolve. You get it, that there's going to be a team forming and you have co-captains. Yvette and Catherine are your co-captains, the liaisons, and they are like your co-quarterbacks, or I don't know, what analogy would work here? I feel like everywhere I look, there's a retriever sign, and I'm like, I don't think that's an appropriate analogy, but in general, there are co-captains who report directly to the president they bring this team together, and then the fellow works for them. So that's a very basic explanation of the model. It's not that fancy, but yet it is really what is the secret sauce, is that there's people meeting monthly to actually talk about this work. They don't spend their time in a committee structure. They talk about ideas. They talk about what they've learned from failure. They engage in process mapping. They do all kinds of things, but it's a different way of using your time that sets the institution up for success. These are, thus far, the projects and initiatives we've worked on. Today, I've got a chance to get a sense of where UMBC is, and over time, we will be able to support you with proactive advising, chatbots, and your completion grants. You're going to be implementing them. We are giving you another 50 grand to implement that further. Right now, we're working on, we started the Black Student Success Initiative, and we're really excited that that is about to get funded. And so that is about redesigning the institution around Black student success. And while we are doing it, we are learning how to do that identity-conscious redesign work so that we can go on to do it with Latinx students, student parents, adult students, any type of student. We actually have to have a model for how you do this work. And it's shocking that it hasn't existed up until now. But the project that is also about coming up is academic recovery from COVID. and specifically how we help students who have been disadvantaged in the last 2 years and how we apply interventions in real time to get them back on track. What I would tell you is, as much as this is very pretty, it looks like we start a project in 1 year and then we're done. It all bleeds together, and honestly, there are still times where I'm like, wow, we're still working on predictive analytics. Wow, we're still not implementing always the best lessons from proactive advising. We've created playbooks from these projects, but I would just say, think of it as we start a new thing together each year, and it is always the campuses decide. So your liaisons and your teams, it starts with, what is your problem? Does everyone else have this problem? And not everyone needs to have that problem, and not everyone needs to do every project. These are designed entirely around the needs of the campus, and we do the work to support you, we raise money for you, and we get you the professional development and support you need. And then when you do awesome stuff, we are noisy, and we get you a lot of attention for it. So here's an example, and this is something I think that would be really helpful here at UMBC, specifically when we're talking about transfer students. So this is an example of how the U Alliance works. This is a process map. It's not that fancy. It's just a bunch of sticky notes. It turns out that's actually probably the most promising technology that we needed to use in higher ed. And this is about that intentional time. So you probably have heard the story of Georgia State. They've eliminated race and income as a predictor of outcome. And they did it by not excluding people at the door, but actually redesigning their work. This is where they started. And this is where we try and start every time. Your fellow will be trained in process mapping and be able to facilitate this. It's essentially a very basic idea. For everything that a student goes through, put a sticky note up. Every email, every financial aid hold, every intervention, every step we expect them to do. But what we do is, this is why the Michigan State example is good. So that starts with Georgia State. That was how they started. And they shared their experience at one of our convenings. And the Michigan State team went home from that convening and decided to get everyone in a room for the first time who works on student success. And it was just an afternoon. And they just decided to map a 3-month window of time from the time the student gets admitted to the day they show up on campus. And they just wanted to know, how are we communicating with that student? What's their experience? Now, number one, everyone's in the room. Okay, so this isn't like a plume of smoke comes up and that's what we're told what to do. Everyone there is seeing the problem evolve over time. The key about process mapping is you're mapping out what really happens, not the fantasy of what happens, which is what we all have. And so they just mapped it out. And it turns out that at the end of that day, they took a step back, and when it came to emails, they found that there were 450 Post-it notes, which means that they were sending in 3 months, from the time you get admitted to the day you show up on campus, 450 emails. And as much as people find that shocking, if you don't know what your number is, it's probably 500, because we don't have traffic cops on communication. And one of the cheap and easy ways I suggest to understand what this is like, create a fake student email account and actually leave it for a year and just see. Sign it up for all the kinds of things that students would have to go through and just see how many emails are waiting. And ask yourself what's the message? Because for first-gen students, what we're saying is, don't check your email. And good luck, you're gonna figure it out on your own. And also sign up for Quidditch. There were also 50 types of holds that a student could have on their account that the university didn't know about, which means that they were hitting booby traps, and it wasn't on purpose, but essentially it was set up for the student to not be able to be successful. So this is something where in real time, in the room together, we pick a small problem, we map it out, we see what needs to be fixed. The great thing about this is instant momentum, low-hanging fruit that you can fix right then. There are things that you didn't realize that are a bigger problem, and it helps to drive change because now you can't deny it. It's not just like a hunch, or it's not just because you think that it's the right thing. So those are the secret sauce of the Alliance, and in summary is we found that clear goals, leadership, which you all know, you had the benefit of Freeman Hrabowski, which honestly most universities don't have a real, like a president who feels like a great leader, who's articulate and visionary and says that's the direction and we're going in it and repeats themselves. That's what leadership is in this sector. And so we have a board that is entirely full of leaders and they're the ones who are driving this. We have co-captains, Yvette and Catherine, We're going to have a cross-functional team that meets together regularly. You're going to have your fellow who actually supports that team. And we're going to check our data on an annual basis to know how we're doing. And we're going to make progress together. That's essentially how this works. Now, there's a lot other stuff in there, but that's essentially the model of why it's the support you need to be successful. And again, these are going to be based on your aspirations and what you want to change over time. So that's the last piece that I wanted to share is this is something that each campus has to have as well, is that we don't have any space where we actually talk about what didn't work. Most campuses do not have an autopsy process. And I realize that this doesn't work as well at one campus because normally what I would do right now is say, hey, go to your neighbor and talk about a failure at your institution that nobody talks about. But you're all here and you work together. So you might actually, it might be something that's led by that person. But in general, think about something that didn't go well here. Some idea, you know that there's something. And then the question to ask yourself is, when it didn't work out, how did you treat it? Was there even a meeting to talk about what you learned from it? Was there any chance to uncover what could have been done differently? This is a big part of the problem, is that we actually have to develop a strategy for how we're going to handle failure and how we're going to learn from it. We also ask people a very basic idea, which is, where do you get new ideas? When's the last time a new cool thing came to campus that was like, it worked, it was amazing? I'm not as interested in what it was. I want to know where it came from. Is it when so-and-so went to that one meeting? Is it because this team over here had an off-site retreat? Is it because students actually led the way? If you don't spend time thinking about where new ideas that work come from, you will not get more of them. You have to engineer your time to give yourself that gift again, but you actually need the time to think about it. And that is what is absolutely missing. The last piece is that we then create habits. I recently became a meditator. It took me years to try it. And I just, every time I kept being like, well, is it this kind of meditation? Is it this? And am I doing it right? And it just failed every time. And I feel like everything in COVID is telling everyone that you're supposed to meditate and do yoga every day and drink a ton of water and also eat like leafy green vegetables. And all we do is just like, give me the bag of cookies. I'm tired. And so what I did is I stopped feeling judged by the habit itself about the meditation, and I focused on forming the habit. So instead of thinking about whether I was doing transcendental meditation or I was doing it for 20 minutes or it was perfect, I just wanted to try and set myself up so that my morning had a trigger that I would then meditate, right? And so some days I do it for 1 minute, and sometimes it's 30 seconds. Sometimes it's just a few breaths, but I do it because I focused on forming the habit. And the question I would ask for you is, what kinds of habits would an institution who eliminated your equity gaps have? How often would you talk about it? Would you do a New Year's resolution time where you all get together once a year and actually think about what would be necessary? Would you reimagine your calendar and how you spend time together? What are the kinds of habits? Because what happens too much in higher ed is we do it once and we feel good. We feel the rush of, we did it. And then we never do it again. And we don't give ourselves the gift of that. And so when you think about uncovering learnings from failure or surfacing ways to have more new ideas come forward, we then have to find a way to set them up into the habits of our institution. And you all have the freedom to do that. We just continually accept a calendar that we think is like super powered by someone else, but you all have the authority right now to decide that like once a month we're gonna have a huddle where we're all gonna go through our calendars and do a meeting diet. We're gonna evaluate the nutritional value of the meetings that we have for whether or not they're actually helping us achieve our goals. And we're gonna all agree that we're gonna cancel 5, maybe 2, maybe 1, just once a month. Those are the kinds of little small habits that will be transformative over time. So I just wanted to make sure to give you some stuff that you could take action on, but this is a sense of what the Alliance has learned over time, is that when institutions work together, we know that you can move faster, you don't have to learn things for yourself that, frankly, someone else has already had to learn, and that you can actually use being part of the Alliance to be able to get away with stuff that might typically not have been socialized internally, but because it's part of your Alliance project, you can actually move faster. And I'm really excited about what UMBC is going to bring to the Alliance. I'm just so grateful for the work that you've already done. The passion for your students is so evident every time I talk to you, and it's just an honor to be here. So I thank you so much. And again, welcome to the UIA. And now I'm ready to, either I dance or I do stand-up comedy, or I believe there might be questions. And the first question is always the hardest, so whoever that person is, I mean, if I could Venmo you $5, I would. But, oh, great. Do we have I don't know if we have microphones or if I just throw it. Oh, great. Yeah, the question was about whether the premise in the design of higher ed that small is good and big is bad. There is a presumption that large institutions, large classes, that those are fundamentally always inherently going to be less quality than if you have a small class at a small institution. If you look at the rankings and how they preference and prioritize, that value system is very clearly being conveyed. And I'm not suggesting that we need to get massive and bloated, or every classroom should be thousands of students. I just think that that's an assumption. That's a value assumption that I don't think is always the right. It shouldn't be the North Star for making decisions. We should instead make decisions based on what actually helps a learner, based on their learning style, and what we can actually provide for them. And I don't think that size should be the constraint that is often, even boards, they make that assumption that, oh, a big class size, that's bad. I've actually seen some of the best classes that are big. It's a masterful skill that is very rare, but it's the kind of thing that we actually should uphold and validate, and not say that that's, well, yeah, but there's like some real secret boutique magic sauce happening in a 4-person class. Yeah.
I'll start again. My question relates to how do you balance the competing priorities of achieving a balanced budget and funding things, especially when a lot of things are strapped for funding, with the imperative and desire to achieve student success? How has that shown up in some of the other institutions, and how does that come into the conversation?
Yeah, well, I mean, if anyone knows Mackenzie Scott, give her my number. Just kidding, but seriously though. So actually this is something that is normal everywhere, and there are plenty of institutions that have found, in fact, Georgia State's the most public example, but we've validated it by scaling some of their interventions, that student success is a financial strategy play for an institution. So the example we were just talking about earlier is completion grants, which is you find students who have a hold on their account, like financial aid, you run the audit, and you find those students who can't register for classes because they owe a balance. And you just, like up to like $2,000, you just pay off the balance, and you call them and you have them talk with an advisor to figure out how they're going to move forward. The first person they pay is you. They pay their tuition. We're letting $500, $300, $600 balances. I think your limit is $250, right? We're letting small balances prevent students from just enrolling and paying their tuition. Like, that's just a basic example that we've seen the data over time that shows that students, once you do that, we had 80% of the students that we gave completion grants to graduate within 2 terms. And so if you think about the data you're being held accountable to, that we were just not letting those students graduate, and in fact, all it took was a very small, usually, again, it's, for most of them, ours, it was $0 to $1,000 that we paid off. So that's just one example of a strategically designed intervention that is like, I mean, you're just stopping people from paying your tuition. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Also, we've gone through and identified like who gets to set financial aid holds. At other institutions, it's the Wild West. Anyone can set a hold. And so there are just all kinds of them that don't make any sense. And some of it's imaginary money, like a parking fine with a late fee. They didn't actually rob a bank. Let them register for their classes. There are small changes over time. I'm not saying that's like your play. It's just like pay off everyone's account. But I would say that we have found if you do the work to redesign your institution around the needs of low-income, first-gen, and students of color, you will have a more efficient and effective institution for every student. You will graduate more students, and you will stop losing students. That's the key is, like, we just let students walk out the door, and then we go and hustle for new enrollment, rather than addressing the very basic systemic design that would have supported those students staying. So that is, I would say that's part of the answer. The second is, our board is made up of presidents, so we actually try and strategically communicate the message around the data and what actually works, and if it's been validated. And so we try and make it easier for presidents to make those decisions. And often it's very hard because often what happens is so-and-so comes back from a conference and they said that, getting everyone a Velociraptor that's the new proven strategy. And we don't know enough about it. We don't know if the type of institution that worked at is similar to us. We don't understand the components and the characteristics of that intervention. And so, maybe you have a little bit of budget, but like you're just making decisions in a vacuum kind of blindly. And so we try and make it so it's easier to make smart decisions. We hold you accountable on the data. We're incredibly noisy when you make the right choices. And I don't think that scaffolding has existed previously in a public space for student success. I'm not saying that I'm not as good as when your basketball team was killing it and your social media was so awesome, right? Like I'd love to be that noisy, but honey is a great, like you get a lot more flies with honey. We get a lot of attention for this work when you do the right thing. That is one of those areas that will finally have a competing chance when it comes to the prioritization. Also, I'll just say like, Freeman said, we're gonna do it, whatever it is. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned student-driven institutional design or user-friendly design, and the way that I can think about that, in the traditional way is, let's say, shared governance and having the Student Government Association participate, or maybe organizing a focus group for students about a certain program, right? Asking them whatever questions we need to ask. Do you, have you come across any examples of doing that in a more embedded way or a more creative way to get, student input sort of like more constantly or on a routine basis?
So again, if Mackenzie Scott would just call me, we have a concept for this. What we've validated in COVID is that every institution is flying blind and we don't have a systemic way to gather empathy insights. Surveys are having diminishing returns. Students are tired of them. They also make the fundamental assumption that we know what the right question is. And they're rarely as inclusive and representative as they should be. Also, chatbot messages and all the other ways that we get insights, it's those things, and also a student voicing an issue to a faculty member who we just get lucky enough knows how to get it up the chain of command. Those are the only ways that we seem to get that information. Some institutions formulate things like in communications, you could form a marketing paid internship for students where they actually help get together and regularly iterate and come up with TikToks or dynamic social media. That's one of the spaces where that's easiest. So creating spaces where students are actually their job is to actually help us source challenges and what students are thinking. But what we want to do is a systemic and scaled approach to have focus groups bi-monthly that are actually compensating students for their time, that are extremely diverse, representative, and bringing in specific groups on a consistent basis, so every month, right? And those insights are going to your institution, so you actually are hearing what students have to say. We have this prototype, and it's designed by a fantastic qualitative researcher, Dr. Kristen Wren at Michigan State, who understands the methodology very well. And so we have the concept, and we want someone to fund it, and we are a lot of what I spend my time doing is pitching people to try and get them to fund projects. This is when I have a meeting on Friday, but I'm like trying to find the right funder for this. I think that if we can do this, we prototype it on UIA campuses, and you could make it so that you have insights that are distilled that are then like, I'm not saying that you can draw like lines across, because obviously different student populations, but if we could say that, for instance, in COVID, we could have known the technology issue was showing up in the way it did much earlier than it took us. We could actually know what was happening. Like, the fact that it took us this long to talk about hunger and homelessness, how embarrassing for higher education. That has been a problem. We've had students living in our cars since the 80s and probably before. And yet only now, because of the work of faculty and researchers, is that talked about regularly. Like, how many other things are we not aware of because we just haven't actually assumed that perhaps it's not our questions and we need to just set ourselves up to listen. So we think that we could actually do this and the whole sector would benefit. You'd actually know what students are going through in real time. I also think universities would pay for it. Over time, this could be a service that could evolve into something that would be revenue generating. But that's the concept that we're, since I'm just amongst friends, my friends on the internet, that's what we're trying to work on right now. But yes, it's clearly a space that we need.
Hi, Bridget. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Brittany.
I don't know if the people on the internet can see me. I'm Brittany Brown from Student Affairs. We talked a little bit about this morning, but I'm interested in what role you believe Student Affairs plays in this initiative and how you've seen Student Affairs colleagues sort of contribute to this in the other institutions that you've worked with over the years.
Can't do it without you. Many of our liaisons are VPs for Student Affairs or sit in, like, it depends on the institution. They have to typically be a part of the student success team. Yeah, I think it really depends on what the project is, of where you're going to be able to have time and energy put into it, because we're sensitive to how much you have on your plate. But yeah, no. So part of this is we look at things as like, there's not a student affairs side of the house and an academic affairs side of the house. There's student success. Everybody's on the same team. That's it. I think the division is helpful and understandable in terms of our structure at times, but it can often be problematic at certain institutions. So we just believe this is everyone's job, and that's why we try and make the work as fun and inviting and fulfilling as possible, because we want it to always attract people from all over. We don't want this to be a thing that's like, oh God, I got another project from those people, And so, yeah, I mean, if we could have everybody, we would. But this is, we know that all of the work that's happening here wouldn't happen without Student Affairs.
Great, thank you. I hate to cut this short, but we are running out of time, so we need to move on. But thank you, this has been a great discussion. Thank you for your insight, Dr. Burns, and we're excited about being a part of this team, and we'll continue working.
I'm excited,
together.
and Yvette and Catherine, when you have questions, these are the folks, if you want to raise an issue that you find, or if you want to connect, they're the folks you talk to, because part of this issue is that I can't learn the bureaucracy of every institution. You don't want me spending my time doing that. And I always want to make sure that they're the ones who bring things forward, coordinate the team, so they're the folks to reach out to. And your fellow search is underway, and so if you know anyone who would be amazing, just encourage them to apply, because it's the coolest job in higher ed, I swear. But yes, thank you so much. And again, welcome to the Alliance. And I'm going to go meet with Freeman now.